Welcome to today's roundtable around grad life as part of this year's Experience Grad set of offerings, allowing graduate students who are considering coming to York in the coming year to learn a little bit more about York, about graduate programs, about being a graduate student, and so on. I'm going to give just another minute or so for any other participants that might be joining us to join the Zoom call, and then I'm going to begin with the proceedings for today. So thank you for your patience. All right, let us start. So, hello and welcome to Experience Grad York 2022. This is a Q&A, a question and answer about grad life. My name is Mark Hayward. I'm the Associate Dean Academic in the Faculty of Graduate Studies. I'm also an Associate Professor in the Graduate Program in Communication and Culture. So today is an opportunity for you to hear a little bit more about graduate students, from graduate students, and have them talk a little bit about the whole range of experiences associated with their time at York in a graduate program, from what brought them to York, so how they made their decision about which programs to join, through to their current experiences in grad school. So I hope this is a chance for us to talk about both the big stuff, so the ways that we make decisions around grad school, what to do and how we think about this in relationship to what we've done, but also where we want to go, but also the everyday things that can make such a difference in how we live our lives, about the experience of being in graduate school, what it's like, maybe some of the obstacles they've encountered, but also some of the really positive experiences that have come out of their time here at York. Now I'm going to ask our panelists to join us shortly. But before I do so, I want to begin by recognizing the many Indigenous nations that have long-standing relationships to the territories upon which York University campuses are located, that precede the establishment of the university itself. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, recognizing that many of you may be in other parts of the world or other parts of this continent, I ask that you think about the territory where you find yourself and the peoples who have lived there and have been caretakers of that territory and land. Now, I'd like to turn now to today's conversation around grad life. I want to begin by just outlining a few, technical things or logistical things, which is that this is really a Q&A. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask the panelists or myself during the course of today's conversation, feel free to put that into the Q&A that you can access via Zoom. Some of the questions we'll be able to answer live as part of our conversation. And some of the other questions, Eileen Watson, who is helping us organize and run this event, will be able to type answers into the Q&A directly. So please do feel free to participate as appropriate. You won't be able to use the chat function during the conversation. However, materials and links to various York websites will be shared over the course of the chat, where you can access them there. So again, these is just sort of some of the technical things. The last thing just to share is that closed captioning is enabled. So should you need to have access to closed captioning, please do turn that function on now. If you're having difficulties, you can perhaps chat with Eileen, and she'll be able to see if there's a technical issue there that we might be able to help you sort out. I'd like now, though, to turn things over to our participants, and I'm just going to move back into not being pinned and ask our participants for today to turn on their camera and to begin to introduce themselves. We have three illustrious panelists. The first panelist who's going to introduce himself is Josephine Morgenhoff. So over to you, Josephine. I'll just let you say a few words.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Josephine. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate in the Department of Civil Engineering at the Lassonde School of Engineering. I'm in the home stretch of my PhD studies, about 6 months away, I'm hoping, from defending. Ask any PhD student when they're going to finish, and that's kind of a loaded question, but fingers crossed. My research area is in the applications of machine learning to underground excavations. So my background is geotechnical engineering, and I worked in that field for a few years before returning to research. And now most of my work is in the mining and infrastructure industries. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Josephine. That's great. Thanks. I'm going to pass things over now to Balkis Osman. Say a few words about yourself. Introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Balkis Osman. I'm an international PhD student at the Department of Environmental Studies. So I'm currently in my fourth year, researching on climate risks and food insecurities, and also how smallholder farmers respond to climate risks. So this area in particular has been an area of interest for me because I've worked in the intersection of food, agriculture, and also policy analysis in a number of developing countries. So it's the major thing that inspired my decision to pursue research in the area. So today I'm looking forward to answering all questions about my graduate studies experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now over to you, Michael.
Hello, my name is Michael, and I'm a second-year master's student in the psychology department, specializing in developmental sciences. My research focuses on the problem of transfer, meaning whether training from one form in one context will or will not transfer to another form or context. What I'm specifically looking at are how there are certain kinds of problems where even very educated people will make biased judgments, even though they should probably know better. So with my research, what I'm hoping to do is to identify certain kinds of training that will best help people to overcome their heuristics so that they can make less biased judgments. And I'm also looking at qualifying what kind of training works best for the kind of person.
Great, thank you. All fascinating projects. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about them. All right, so I'm gonna ask, let's go way back. All of you I've started various times ago. So let's go way back to maybe the first moment where what inspired you, or how did you come to make the decision to pursue, in the case of a doctorate? So how did you come to the decision to move into a PhD? In the case of graduate school generally, how did you sort of come to that, to make that decision? You know, what was it that informed your decision or made you realize that this was something that you wanted to do? We can start in any order. So maybe we'll go in whoever. I see, Balkis, you've unmuted, so I'm going to go with you first. I don't know if you meant to unmute, but I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. So for me, right after my master's, I had this internship offer to work with the United Nations International Fund for Agricultural Development. And basically in my work, I engage a lot with government and also NGOs. And in our line of work, I also did more of risk assessments and also more of policy analysis and also more of agricultural sector related issues. So, and along the line, I also was in charge of reviewing specific agricultural risk assessment document. And I really enjoyed that kind of comment I had to make on the methodology, and also in terms of the kind of proposed recommendations being brought up in the reports. And I was also happy to see how some of my comments were being taken and revised into the document. So right on the go, I started making plans, how can I advance myself, position myself in a better way that I can make a better influence, being it on agriculture sector risk assessment or advising government on how to manage risk. So the best decision for me was to go back to school, dissect into the issues of risks, issues of households responses, issues of government, high level instruments and tools to manage agriculture sector risks. And that's why I chose to do environmental studies, and also to focus my research on climate sector risk management and for the agricultural sector of Ghana. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Josephine, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I can speak to having done both a master's and now almost a PhD, the kind of frames of mind that I was in for both of those, because I would say that I was in a pretty different kind of decision-making place when I made both of those decisions. As an undergrad with an engineering degree, you could argue I don't necessarily need a graduate degree to have a successful career. And I have lots of colleagues who graduated from that professional degree program and are doing very well for themselves now. But after my undergrad, I always wanted to move to somewhere else and challenge myself in a different kind of geographic location. And I stayed within Canada, but moved to an opposite coast. And I also wanted to be challenged more intellectually with a broader scope project than what I thought I would be offered as a new grad. And so as a master's student, I decided to take on that challenge because I really had kind of the pull factors, the zest for wanting to learn more and to pursue another degree. After my master's, I worked for several years in engineering industry. I thought at that point, I've had enough of research. I want to do something that's practically applied. I want to work for real clients. And then funnily enough, after 3 or 4 years, I reached a saturation point with that. And I felt like I hit a bit of a ceiling. I didn't like the fact that I had to work on somebody else's schedule and budget, and I couldn't answer the questions that I was interested in. In engineering, usually you're given kind of a finite chunk of money or finite chunk of time, and you have to work within that scope to answer the technical questions posed. So then I started looking around for other opportunities, and I connected with my now PhD supervisor. And he enticed me to York because the engineering school was relatively new then. There was lots of funding. And he basically said, you can have the freedom to answer whatever questions interest you. So I guess the difference being when I went into my master's, there was a pull factor. And when I went into my PhD, there was a push factor out of industry. But in the end, both were good decisions for me. And I really appreciate the transferable skills. And maybe this is more Michael's area about whether they're actually transferable, but the transferable skills of problem solving in an academic context versus in an industry context.
That's great. Well, Michael, that was a good throw to you. So I'm going to turn to you now.
So for me, pursuing a doctoral degree is it's like having a dedicated opportunity to deeply explore a research area that I'm interested in, just like the other panelists. And so for me, it's also about like having an opportunity to develop skills that can help me transition to industry later on, because usually in something like psychology with just an undergraduate degree, it can be difficult to get a job in industry. But also at the same time, my impression of life outside of academia is that, as Josephine said, is that, there's a lot less freedom in the kinds of things that you can really problems that you can dig in and you focus your energy on. And so I'm just happy that, during my graduate studies, I can pick any problem I'd like and really, really dig deep into it. And so in that way, I kind of see the doctoral degree as part of my self-development.
Thank you. These are all wonderful answers, inspiring, encouraging me to consider doing a second doctorate. I want, though, to push you back a little bit further in your decision process, because, and I'm going to borrow, Josephine, that language you used of pushes and pulls. right? Because I think in every moment of our lives, there's pushes and pulls in different directions, right? Um, uh, and I guess we could, I'm not in science nor in engineering. I'm presuming we could also describe it. This is some combination of a desire to go places, but also certain kinds of, inertia to stay in the same place. Inertia makes it sound bad, but it's just a phenomena, right? So, but let's think about it that way. And I want to sort of think about, how did you start that process, right? Obviously, in some cases, we might think about these in terms of, Michael, you mentioned that in your field, the degree trajectory is one that may move people towards particular higher degrees. That's obviously going to be specific in certain ways. But how do you even begin that conversation with yourself, but with other people? And I'm kind of really interested in maybe having you break down what that process was actually kind of like for each of you. Because from my own experience, it wasn't like I woke up one day and I was like, a PhD, I must get a PhD. I wish I had that clarity. And I wish I had that clarity earlier in life. But I'm really interested in, like, sort of how did you compose, or how did you think about this? And I'm thinking about this in the mind of people who are making the decision now. Who can they turn to, or how might they begin to sort of put together I don't know, cost benefit, pluses, minuses, however you want, pushes and pulls, however you want to think about it. So maybe we can, I don't know who wants to take all that question first. Josephine, you've unmuted, so I'm throwing it to you.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of quip, but in seriousness, after my master's, someone asked me, would I ever do a PhD? And my words were, hell no. And I stood by that for a couple of years, and I slowly came over to the dark side, as some would say. But I think the most valuable insights that I got deciding both to do a master's and then to do a PhD is to talk to people who've actually done grad school. I would say, and I hope you all would agree, that graduate school is a totally different beast than undergrad. You're really in control of your own fate. You get to take courses that are really in the weeds of things that you're really interested in. Everyone who's in your class with you is there because they want to be. And it's a different environment than undergrad, where there's core courses and things that you have to take to finish your degree requirements. In grad school, you kind of get to follow the path that you're interested in. I was also fortunate enough that my dad actually has a PhD in a different field of engineering. So when I was very young, I saw him go through that, and kind of what the requirements were, both intellectually, but also emotionally, also the time constraints, that sort of thing. That firsthand experience really helped me see what it was that I was signing up for. And I would say the other component that was really important for me was mentorship. So I had a few professors in my undergrad that I was close enough to that I could ask them about their personal experiences. And that insight, again, is really important, because doing research work is totally different than working in a company where you're working with a team of people. It's really self-driven and milestone based, and it does take a certain degree of self-propulsion almost to push you through it. You can't rely on other people to motivate you. And that is both a good and a bad thing. I think we'll have questions about that a little bit later on. But for sure, if you're considering grad school, it's really important to talk to somebody who's experienced it, that you trust their opinion, and also someone who knows you, to know if it would be a good fit for you or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a lot of really helpful advice in terms of turning to people who, I don't know if anybody else has anything else they wanted to add on that particular, in terms of factors or people, or just to really sort of maybe just second what Josephine said. It's also.
Yeah, I just want to add something quickly. In my case, what I would say is that at the time I was at IFRAD, I started talking to some of the technical specialists. We call them technical specialists. That's the position they hold. And I really admire the kind of impact they were making in the organization. So I saw myself, my next 5 to 10 years in their position. And I also started talking to them. And I remember talking to one of the guys who I was pretty close to. And one of the advice was that if you're looking to fill a position like my own, one thing you also have to consider is a PhD, because things are changing. The world is changing all the time. There are new ways of learning and doing things. So one way to explore the new ways is to pursue, an academic, an advanced level education. And I think it's really inspired what I'm doing today. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think that can be so important, just those contacts and conversations with people who have gone through it. And also people who've gone through it and ended up in very different contexts, right? To think about who do a PhD to work in industry, who do a PhD to work in the university, who do a PhD, but then end up with a career in a very different trajectory. All of them may give you very different perspectives. Michael, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to this particular range of thoughts.
So for me, I think in terms of like, well, I mean, so I'm a second year master's student, right? So back when I started, it was in the very beginning of the pandemic. So to me, it really was like a good opportunity that I could, since I probably wouldn't be able to do anything if I didn't, continue schooling, to start the graduate degree. And I think it's a lot of fun, and I really get to learn so much about something that I really like. And I think that outside of graduate school, it can be sort of difficult to have like a period in your life where you're free to learn anything you want, and you also have supervisors who are very knowledgeable about the areas that you're interested in, and they can sort of guide you this way or that way in your research. And to be able to dig that much and freely in whatever way you want is not something that you can really get anywhere else.
Yeah, and I think I think that this really does sum up, I think, something that is really a key difference between sort of undergraduate and graduate, or the context. And I want to maybe come back a little bit to talking about that transition, because I know that we'll have some people here who are, which may be fresher for some of us than others. I know, Michael, this is you sort of something is that you're a few years out of. It may be further back for some of us. And I think in terms of thinking about that transition from undergraduate to graduate, if you could talk a little bit about how you thought about some of the continuities. So the way that you saw the undergrad built you right into your graduate, and the ways in which you sort of saw differences, not just in terms of the experience of what being in grad school is like, but also sort of, so there's a question in the chat thinking a little bit about how people move from one field to another, and making that leap maybe across fields. So I'm just wondering if you might want to think a little bit about how you navigated that shift. If you stayed in a field, what you carried with you, if you moved fields, what you didn't or what you left behind, and maybe some of you have moved across fields, so you might want to address that.
I think I can go first, since I'm
of course, yeah,
we're both most fresh out of undergrad.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely one of the biggest changes, sometimes in undergrad you would take courses, right? And they're required for your particular major, but you really have no idea why you're learning about it. Like sometimes it's like it's very difficult. It's a third-year course. There's lots of details, or fourth year. And sometimes you're wondering, but what am I going to do with this? But it turned out, at least for my particular case, I took courses both on the social and clinical aspect of psychology, but I also took them more on, perhaps you could call it, the harder parts of psychology, perhaps like cognitive psychology, about how people remember things and process things, and the neuroscience behind it. So being able to have these two things and having an undergrad that's a bit wider can help in your research, because it kind of makes you multidisciplinary in what you do.
I was just going to say, I think that this actually maybe speaks to a point that several of you have raised around thinking. You've described it as freedom, but I think one of the ways to think about it is actually understanding and being a little bit intentional about your studies. That a lot of the way when you're at the undergraduate level, you sort of might feel like you're going through courses and their requirements, and that's why you're in the course. But in graduate school, to a certain extent, you really have that ability to map the courses, but also map your research projects in a way that's part of your story, as opposed to maybe a story that's being laid out for you. And so I think that's a really, really important point to recognize in terms of that transition of thinking about but also I would also say this from my own experience, this may not always be something that you, in some fields, it might be something that you come in prepared to know what you're doing next. And in other fields, there's a transition period there. So, it's not always like if you say to yourself, well, I'm thinking of applying, but I have no idea what I want to do. That's not uncommon. That's a very common one. Josephine, I don't know if you have something you want to add there.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that I can't really say that I started my undergrad or even graduated from my undergrad saying, okay, next I'm going to do a master's and then I'm going to work and then I'm going to do a PhD. Like it never was, I mean, I always followed, as much as I'm an analytical, technically minded person, I've always more followed my instincts on what I was going to do next. I think it's, you know, really important to enjoy what you do. And so my next steps were always governed by, will this give me personal fulfillment and will I enjoy doing it? Will be a technical challenge as well as a good group of people to work with and a good work environment. And that's driven a lot of my decisions. I understand that my field is maybe a little bit different than psychology, where you have to have those higher diplomas in order to practice or do clinical research. But in engineering, you don't really necessarily need those things unless you want to pursue them. And so I guess more on the, whenever I get more technical students asking me if they should do grad school, I ask them, do you enjoy research? Because that's what you're going to be doing for 2 to 4 years. Do you like your supervisor? Do you like the lab that you're going to be working in? Those types of things. And yeah, that's how I mean, I even in first year when I went into my undergrad, I just took a general first year in my undergrad university and then found geological engineering and then from then found rock mechanics just by happenstance and just followed the thread of what it is that I enjoy doing. And I mean, my dad said to me early on too, that if you enjoy doing something, eventually someone's going to pay you to do it. So it's,
Yeah. That's a great,
that's the hope, but
it's a hope. Yeah.
I guess the connection there is you enjoy doing something, then you get good at doing that. And
then you get paid to do it. Yeah. Valky, I don't know if you have something else you wanted to add there or anything you want to add to this in terms of thinking about that transition between the various degrees.
Yeah, my experience is different from what's here in Canada, because for us, like a young girl growing up in Ghana, I always have to think about the future securities, right? Whether or not the future is secured for me in terms of work, in terms of my ability to, provide for myself and also help my family. So for us, it's about a kind of planning ahead of time. After my undergrad, what do I want to do? Do I want to pursue a master's? And if it's a master's, where do I want to go? Maybe I want to do a master's abroad, in the case Canada, York University. And then in that case, how can I do it? Because I don't have money to pay for my fees. So the number one thing that will come to mind is thinking about schools that offers, funding opportunities. So that has been my line of thinking, and it's a normal kind of thought among young people, youth in my country and other places, so of Africa. So I'm just happy to hear about Josephine's, idea and line of thinking, which is good, because we would all love to have a world where we would be happy to do something we are happy to do, right? We will always feel like doing what we love to do. Instead of thinking about insecurities, we should think about our satisfactions, what we get from what we do. So yeah.
That's a great point. And it actually, I mean, it lends, so I have two sets of questions I want to ask, and I'm going to come back to the second set of questions. But because you just mentioned that, I want to follow up on another question, which I think you're already sort of touching about, thinking on what your real world experiences brought to your decision to become a graduate student, but then also how your experiences that you've been talking about there in terms of the planning, you were talking sort of planning ahead, how that's something that informs your progress through your academic degrees.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what I would say is it has really helped a lot, because for me, thinking about, first of all, planning about the kind of funding I will get to support my studies, because without funding, I wouldn't been able to pursue the studies. And also thinking about the package, the bundle of assets I will present in my application, my graduate studies application. So it's the more reason why I went back to kind of work, have internship, be in the work environment for some time, so that I can have some kind of valid and insight and experiences to present on my resume. And also to kind of network Okay, so like on LinkedIn, network with people, try to understand what's going on in my area of studies, some of the top schools or top departments and what they are doing in my area of STEM, my area of research. So some of these kind of planning ahead and all the points or the steps I took really helped out because I remember sometime I talked to a number of people. I think some of my colleagues ahead of me studying in the UK and others studying in Canada here, and try to compare what is it that I want from Canada and then what is it that I would want studying in Ontario or Toronto, and specifically how York University is better placed than other universities. And for instance, when you look at my experience, I'm more into like community engagement, I'm more into rural research, I'm more into studying vulnerabilities, issues of women and agriculture. So the kind of profile I envisioned for York, and also reading through the faculty members' profile, I saw that there's been some kind of research going on between the Faculty of Environmental Studies and the French Jane community and also the Black Creek community. And there's been a whole lot of community organizing and partnerships, which directly coincides with what I've done before in Ghana and also what I was doing with IFAD, with my internship and my consultancy. So for me, the experience I already had made me think, okay, I'm a better candidate. And then for York and environmental studies, and environmental studies will also be happy to have me because I have something that they are looking for. So yeah, pretty much I think it's been an interesting journey and so far so good. And if I would love to do it again, I will still choose, yeah, York environmental studies. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. That's yeah. I want to come back to something you just said, and I want to ask this actually of all the panelists, if they can think about it, is you mentioned, and this is actually a question from the chat as well, you mentioned looking and locating somebody who might be faculty members that you could work with. And I want to ask this question in general around prepping for grad life and faculty members. And I want to ask this in line first with maybe a question or a point that Josephine made a few minutes ago around maintaining, developing that relationship with people you worked with at the undergraduate level because of letters of recommendation or letters of support, which I know can be a very important thing. But I also want to talk about the other end of it, which is not just where you're coming from, but also where you're going, right? And talk a little bit about that process of, which can be, both can be intimidating, right? Talking to somebody you know, who maybe you don't know that well, to ask a letter, but also writing to somebody you don't know to tell them, hey, I would like to work with you. And so maybe we can start with the first part around thinking about maybe how you navigated that at the tail end of your program, and then moving forward, talking a little bit how you navigated arrival at York, figuring out and contacting people and managing that. So yeah, so I don't know who wants to take that word first, but because you just sort of mentioned this notion of thinking about looking at so maybe we'll start with that in terms of contacting people at York at the outset.
Yeah. So for me, looking at the faculty profiles, I was able to kind of note down and point out that there were a few of the faculty members doing something that I was really interested in. So the number one, my current supervisor came up, and others. Her research area is on climate justice, community management, feminist ecologists, which is the area I would want to further research. And also there were other faculty members researching into food, community-based food systems, and Canada food policy. I also contacted them. So in my contact and in my first email, it was about explaining what I was doing and what I would want to do. What I was doing at the time was on agriculture sector risks and the fact that I would like to explore further. I attached my resume just to give them a rough idea of my past experiences, right? In fact, they all replied. And then I remember my current supervisor requesting to meet, and we had a Skype call. We exchanged a whole lot, and then the fact that she even had a good understanding of my background in Ghana, and I think she had research experiences in Ghana. So we had kind of discussed a lot about traditional ways of, indigenous ways of managing risks, dealing with climate issues and all that. And the fact that there is more going on in terms of climate injustices, and the fact that global south, like developing countries, including countries in Africa are currently, suffering a lot and are not able to manage the risk, So some of these discussions, the discussion we had on the first day, I think it really made her know that, oh, I'm the right person she's been looking for. And I'm saying same as me. I mean, I was able to understand her better. And also, I think we were able to build some kind of rapport. Up till now, I see her not only as a supervisor, right? I see her as someone I can talk to even beyond academics. And that's what graduate studies and supervision is meant to be. Yeah.
Thanks. Is there anything anyone, wants to talk about their experience in terms of how they navigated that?
Yeah, my experience was quite a bit different. I went to undergrad in a Canadian university, so there's a bit of a built-in network there, but I found that kind of keeping in touch with people I met at conferences, either at undergrad level, or I did some co-ops, keeping in touch with former employers, not necessarily for the purpose of getting something out of that relationship, but just because we have mutual interests, and just building that professional network of people that eventually maybe you want to work with, or you need a letter of recommendation. It's kind of a convenient side benefit, I guess, but the main benefit being the intellectual stimulation that you get from having conversations with people in a similar field as you. And so for me, the way the path kind of went was in my undergraduate program. The few professors I mentioned before that I was close to, I spoke with them and said, I'm interested in doing a master's. I think I want to branch out and go to a different university. I'm interested in these things. What do you recommend? And because they're professors and very, in touch with the research and who's producing what kind of research and doing what kind of work, I had a really good conversation with one of the geotechnical professors at my undergrad university, and she gave me a bunch of names and said, these are people that I do or don't have relationships with, but here's the kind of research that they're doing. And it was really helpful to me because as an undergraduate, you kind of step into that world. And I mean, if you have absolutely no connections, you don't even know where to start looking. Some people advocate for looking at the university first and then looking for the professor, or vice versa. For me, it was more the other way around, that I looked for a professor I wanted to work with and then contacted them. So that's how it went for my master's. And then kind of coming full circle for my PhD supervisor was actually somebody I worked with while I was on co-op as an undergrad. So we hadn't really kept in touch in the intervening years, but when I reached out, that common thread was there to say, he actually reached out to me because I was looking for a graduate position. I had posted that on LinkedIn, I think, and just having that common thread already and having each other in our professional networks came around to my benefit. And when he offered the position, I hadn't actually considered doing a PhD yet, and it was kind of the push over the edge that I needed. But I can appreciate like the cold calling part of it. That was more my experience when I was applying for my master's. I had a similar experience where I just, wrote some emails, attached my CV, expressed my interest in some of the things that I saw that they were working on, and kind of hoped for the best. I didn't get responses from everybody, or for some people I got a response they're not looking for grad students, but you just have to develop a bit of a thick skin, or try again next semester, or say, maybe they're in an administrative role and don't have the capacity, but when are they off of that, or that sort of thing. Keep the lines of communication open, even if you're not necessarily getting something out of it right away.
Michael, I don't know if you want to add to that. I have some things I want to say too, but yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I had a pretty similar experience to Josephine. So I mean, for me, I was fresh out of my undergrad. I didn't have like much experience with the academic world because I don't really come from an academic family, you could say. And I mean, I think what's really important is that you reach out to to your potential supervisors well ahead of time. Like you don't want to be doing it like right before the application deadline, because that can be a bit of a sticky situation. And plus, supervisors, by that time, they've already probably talked to a lot of other potential candidates. So you do want to reach out early. But also, at the same time, I think it's important to like pace yourself, because it can get pretty stressful where you basically send this small email about who you are and what you've done, which is basically, everything about you. You send it to the other person, and at least in my experience, they usually don't respond, which can be kind of disheartening. And lastly, if you do get an offer at admission or even during interview, I think it's really important that you speak with the other lab members in private, and just kind of to get an idea of what the general lab experience is like.
Yeah, there's a couple good points I think that people have all raised. I mean, from the perspective of faculty, the first thing I'd say is that receiving letters from students who want to come to graduate school is not awkward, strange, weird, or uncommon. And I don't know if there's any other way to make that more clear. And I think that this is often something, before you've done it, and I'm sure now that you've done it a few times, it's not that strange to write to a faculty member in your program and say, hey, can we contact you? But when you're on the outside, it may feel particularly at the master's level, I think, right? Where you may not have a familiarity at all with the institution, with the people at all. It can feel a little bit daunting. And I think that this is sort of the first thing I'd say. The second bit of advice, which I think you touched upon, and I think is unfortunate on the part of faculty members who don't respond, but to recognize that this is often, this is a professional, not a personal assessment, right? And that if you can't work with somebody because their project is in one place and your work is going in another way, that in some ways may in the long term be the best decision that you could both come to together. Right? Rather than finding yourself in a program, working with a supervisor whose work and interests and is not well suited to you, it is often better for you to not be in a place you want to be if it's the wrong place, but rather be in the right place, even if it's not a place you had planned on. And I think that this is sort of one of those things that's so difficult to sort of navigate, but can be so important. And then the third point, which I think came up in different ways, is to the extent that it's possible, try to learn a little bit about like grad student life, like via this panel, but also more specifically grad student life, whether it's in the lab. And this is sort of more common, obviously, in STEM fields, or if you're in a place where there are labs, but more generally, even sort of the culture of a program, what it's like actually being a graduate student can really help you make the decision. And more generally, I mean, we were going to ask a question to each of you about, living in Toronto, but I think, which has been is a complex question to answer these days, because I mean, you live in Toronto, but do you live in Toronto if you never go anywhere? But you live in, so if you think about this in the sense of, knowing the place that you're going to live, right? That being at a university, it's the life of the mind, but it's also the life of the rest of you too, right? About living in a place, having a social support network as much as possible, whether that's through the university or more broadly, whether that's about even just being able, if you're coming from somewhere else, being able to get back to where you want to go. I remember that this was a determining decision for my own graduate student choice. Was I didn't want to go to a city that didn't have access to an airport that I would be able to eventually find my way back to Canada easily. And that was about wanting to see my family. And that this isn't something I did all the time because it was international, but it did make a difference. These are all the factors that contribute, I think, to making these decisions. And so faculty is the start of this, but it really is much more broad in terms of how we make those decisions. Maybe we've got some more time. So I'm going to ask a few more general questions around graduate student life. And I want to come back to something, Balkis, that you raised around financing for graduate schools and scholarships, and how some of that has worked, and what kinds of scholarship opportunities you've explored, what you've figured out specifically, but then maybe also more broadly, who do you go to if you want to have a conversation about graduate school support and money, in the money sense? And we'll talk about other supports in a bit.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, for this question. For me, I think these days with internet and all that, every information is online. And to start from, my starting point had always been the department website. What is the department saying with regarding finance and fees and funding? Because that's where I'll get to know how much it costs to pay my tuition. And also, there is always a link to available scholarships that will link me to the Faculty of Graduate Studies website. And in the case of York, that's what happened. So from the department website, I was redirected to the FGS website, and there is a whole list of internal scholarships, provincial level, on tri-council, and even external scholarships. So I was also made to understand that there is always a minimum guaranteed kind of funding, which comes in the form of TU-ship, RA-ship, and all that. So from there, I pretty much had a good idea of how much my program costs and how much York FGS is willing to give me, which, I mean, in essence, it was a direct match. No, it wasn't below or above, just a direct match. But the information I had on the website again was that there are opportunities for additional funding, which might come after I have been admitted and enrolled onto courses, maybe at least at one term. So I came in, and then of course that information was true. I joined a whole lot of seminars on scholarships, especially the Varney Scholarship Trudeau, Ontario Trillium, OGS, and a whole lot of scholarship. And in addition to that, there are bursaries to support in terms of financial shortfalls. And in my case, I was so lucky enough, I tried my first year for some scholarship. I was not able to get it. But in my second year, I tried the Varney and then the Trudeau scholarships again, and I got the Varney scholarship, which is a very good funding package. So my advice here is the information is online, and whenever I find it difficult to understand something, I just email the financial advisors. The contact is already on the FGS website. So, and they are always ready and happy to explain things. I remember those days when I was applying for the Varney scholarship, there was this lady, Yuko Serrano. She's been very helpful. I just walk in, ask her, or send emails. Yuko will respond and give me the details. And she's been very supportive to my Varney scholarship application. So yeah, that's what I got to say. And before I go, I also know that there are a whole lot of field work and research cost fund. These are just supplementary kind of money to support students' fieldwork activities, pay for conferences or other knowledge dissemination activities, which is pretty good. I know maybe the bottom line is for students to read about these funding applications online. It's just there, and to prepare a competitive application package, because yeah, the funding is there, but a whole bunch of people are going to apply. And at the end of the day, maybe 4, 5, 6, or 10 students are going to get the scholarship. So it's about competition, right? So.
Yeah, and I think it might be, I was just thinking it might be helpful to think like when you're coming into the institution, sort of maybe your first contact in some cases might end up being with whether it's somebody like Eileen who is thinking about recruitment, whether it's somebody like the GPD, the graduate program director of the program to which you're attending. In the case of a large program like psychology, there will be area coordinators that you would be in touch with. So there will be sort of a contact person who even if they can't answer the question, is kind of the traffic cop of how to field the query. So if you have a specific question, because absolutely, and as you highlighted, the FGS website does have outlined on it what the general funding package looks like, but every program is a little bit different. And so that might be a place to start that conversation. And then once you get to York, I think, you know, you're absolutely right. Then there's a whole team of people, right, from the graduate funding advisor who really will be able to walk you through your situation, right? Like this is where you are at. And then there is the team in the scholarships and awards office. Yuko just actually, Yuko just left that role. She just left that role this week, so she's moved on to another position at York. So we were sad to see her move to elsewhere. But yeah, there is a whole team at York at FGS that works with you in those areas. Maybe I also, though, Michael, because you're in a master's program now. How did you think about scholarships, which is slightly different than from some of the competitions that Balakis was talking about in terms of the Vanier and so on? How did you think about it, or how did that work from your perspective as a master's student?
So as a master's student, well, perhaps I'll focus more on the psychology department. So the psychology department is very large at York, and they have many, even like within the department, there's many scholarship opportunities for specific kinds of research. And for me, when I was looking for scholarship opportunities or basically funding, my first person of contact was the graduate administrator and the team there. They were very helpful. They tell you about all of these different ways that you can apply for funding for your research or for scholarships. And there's also something that's important to keep in mind is that beginning of fall, there tends to be a workshop. I think it's given by the FGS, and they kind of run you through what you kind of want to do in order to prepare a good application to OGS or to NSERC. And so I think that's really important.
What came to mind, I was just going to say as a general point, is that it's never a bad idea. Maybe you would second this or contradict me entirely. Let me know if you want to contradict me here, which is totally fair. It's never a bad idea to have a conversation about what and how the package of financing for graduate school works. It is not like, don't not have that conversation. Have that conversation and be open about it. Like, it is a fair question to ask at the outset. And I think that, some people are more hesitant to discuss maybe money with strangers, but if you have concerns in this area, this is absolutely, it's on the website, there's the information there, but also if you have questions about what that actually means, because I don't know, I'm not an accountant. I mean, I do my taxes, but that's the extent of my financial knowledge. But beyond that, if you think about it, it's like, what does this actually mean? If I make X amount of money, how much money do I take home? How much am I going to live on? Those are real questions. And I think coming back to sort of the broader thing about graduate life, that's a real question to ask yourself, right? To realize how that will work. And these are not inappropriate questions at the outset of a degree. And it's better to ask them at the outset rather than getting into a program, I think. And there are people who can help you really answer those questions. Who in this group is doing a TA or is doing a so so that's right, because Balkis is a Vanier scholar, so you probably are not at the moment.
Yes, I'll be TAing in summer.
Right. How much time would you say in a week you commit to your TA obligations?
I just wanted to add one comment that
go ahead. Yeah, please. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry.
It's a perfect dovetail, actually. But on the personal finance side, being a grad student and personal finance is not trivial. It's not like a normal job where you get a paycheck and it's regular and you can expect the same amount of money into your account every week. It fluctuates. Depending on where the funding is coming from, it might only be once per semester, or it'll be for the first 3 months of the semester, or it'll not happen at all during the summer, or it's a different amount depending on how much you're TAing each semester. So it's really important to be organized so that you don't get surprised by the lack or surplus of cash flow, because that might be what you need to live on the next semester. So that was the comment I was going to make about that.
That's a perfect point. That is a really important point. Yeah.
Yeah. But as a TA, so I actually am not TAing this semester either because I hold the Alexander Graham Bell Scholarship. But prior to that, I was TAing, and it really depended on the semester and what courses you're being assigned. So that's a good conversation to have with your graduate program chair before the semester starts or as the assignments go out, to have an idea of how many hours you're allocated for each particular course. But I would say at the heaviest, I had 10 hours per week, I think. I don't think that we're allowed to work more than that, but don't quote me on that. But it's usually a manageable amount, but it does fluctuate. So depending on how your course director decides to split things up, you might be doing all of the marking for one particular assignment and then no other marking, or you're marking every week. So again, it's really good at the beginning of the semester. Most course directors are very organized about getting all the TAs together and talking about how they've decided to split up the workload. And at that point, you can kind of schedule for yourself, okay, well, I have a conference this week, so if I have marking to do, I'll need to do that in advance. Or maybe there's another TA that can do the marking that week, and I'll do the marking the week after, and so on. But it does take, I don't know, I feel like my life runs in 4-month cycles right now, because financially and in terms of TAing and in terms of my teaching, all of that stuff, it all falls on a 4-month cycle, and you have to kind of figure out what your next 12 weeks look like. Yeah, or 3 months, I guess.
Yeah. Michael, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Yeah. So I've been TAing this year and last year, and well, really like Josephine said, it really depends on your course director and kind of like you know what your interests are. Like I know some people they want to go into a teaching role after they complete their graduate degree. So for them, doing more TA hours would actually be, you know, it's interesting for them. Like they might want to prepare a lecture and lecture one of the professor's classes for a short period. And so so it really depends. But for me, I think right now it's kind of like on waves. Like some weeks I'll spend like 10 hours or 20 hours, but most of the time it's just 1 hour and it's just office hours.
Yeah, and I think that's it's so, well, it's a couple things. Like from the TA perspective, that 10 hours is 10 hours. It's not 10 hours plus 5 hours sort of prep. And I think that it's really important then to really think about, I mean, the other question around the TA is also to think about how you balance that with your other responsibilities, right? Michael, you've got a situation where it sounds like it's working out. You got sort of a very manageable workload, but in the case, Josephine, that you were mentioning, where sometimes you might have, dozens and dozens of assignments. How do you balance that so that you don't have these times where you get completely sort of slammed with stuff?
I wish I could tell you the secret, but it's just, I think a couple of times, again, it's just the foresight. Like at the beginning of term, if you know you're going to be marking assignment 3 for 150 students, and you know that assignment is due in week 6, then likely in week 7, you're not going to be able to do anything else. So yeah, I guess it's balancing in that sense that you know it's coming and you can kind of rearrange things. But your course directors are always there to support you. I've had cases where I just said, there's just too much and there's so much, I want to correct it thoroughly so the students actually have feedback to work on, especially as we're not usually marking multiple choice or anything like that. We're marking something that requires comprehension and explaining of concepts and that sort of thing. That's want to give meaningful feedback, and in those cases, the course director just will support you, or they'll say, okay, well, I'll get another TA to help you, or so on. Yeah, but yeah, sometimes it's only been in short amounts of time, but sometimes there is a lot of marking TA work to be done, but you shouldn't be surprised by that. And your course director should be working towards you not being surprised by that either.
Balkisha, I don't know if you want to speak to this one as well.
So in the past, in my case, what I do is I look at the course calendar and then I compare that to my own. So depending on when the assignments will be due, I'll be able to identify that, okay, for this assignment, I'm going to spread it on a daily basis. Maybe I'll be marking 5 students, 10 students a day, usually in the evening, and I'm done with my own kind of assignment. Then I'll mark it, 5 students a day until everything is done. In some cases, I just commit 2 days or 3 days, do all the markings. Okay, so and it works well. I've never been behind. Never. In most cases I even mark ahead of time, and I offer to help the course directors. So and it works for me. I think it's not before starting, I got this idea of it's going to be difficult PhD and TAship and all that. If I had my way, I would just do the PhD without the TAship. But as I started, there was a point I even did 2 TAship, like full course, 1.5 kind of TAship together, and it was pretty cool. Nothing over stressful. It's all about time management. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's so important, and time management is in a couple ways. One is that you think about it, or I sometimes think about it as the teaching responsibilities are something you need to balance with your other responsibilities. But then you also, and it's designed in a way to really for you to be able to do both, right? That's why the 10-hour cap is there, but also to recognize that there is a time where you may get so focused on the teaching part that sort of other things fall aside, and to recognize that this balance comes back and forth. And I think that that's a broader question here around time management. And there's a couple questions here, and this is so we're going to enter the pandemic section now of the conversation, which is obligatory, I think, in every conversation that's happened over the last 18 months. So there has to be a conversation of how things are going through the pandemic. And I'm going to circle back actually to a question in the chat eventually about staying connected with the graduate student community as a part-time student. But I want to sort of start by saying, so the question is, so how do you keep a social life as a graduate student during a pandemic? But I guess the bigger question is, how have you, or how are things managing in terms of the broader question of well-being, wellness in the context of the pandemic, and what are some of the things that you've been doing to get you through this? Josephine, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I have to say that I've been floored by the resources available at York for graduate students, specifically in the wellness space. I accessed the services a little bit before the pandemic, but I mean, the pandemic was hard for everybody, and being a grad student kind of in your own bubble is a particular kind of hardship, I think. But the FGS advertises really well. I think it's called Gradwell, the program. I'm not sure. I know Aileen will put it in the chat probably. But their counseling services, there was a course given on personal wellness. So like a certificate course over 6 weeks, I think, given by the counselor that's on staff full time, that's specifically present for graduate students to talk to, and the specific kind of mental health challenges that come with being in grad school. My supervisors themselves, I'm co-supervised, and they both were able to point me towards the resources available. I'm not sure if they educated themselves or if that's part of the faculty training if you're going to supervise students, but all of those resources that were made available to me were really appreciated, and also really well communicated, I would say. And I mean, this is the 3rd university that I've attended, and it's been the best in terms of advocating for reaching out for help when you need it. And even if you don't need it, even if it's just maintenance. And yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about the supports that I've received. And I guess in terms of the tools, like the more specifically to answer your question, the tools that are provided through those services in terms of time management or self-care, as much as that's a buzzword, those types of things, connecting to your colleagues and peers, how to have those difficult conversations, how to relax, like those type of things. It's all really communicated really well. And I have nothing but good things to say about that at York, for sure.
That's great to hear. Yeah, Eileen has, I think, shared a link to the wellness and counseling office at FGS, which is graduate student specific, right? So this is for graduate students specifically, and is primarily a referral office, but it also offers these courses and learning opportunities to help graduate students. Recognizing that I think some of the and this is actually sort of maybe one of the different places I wanted to go with this conversation as well, which is that to think about that broader context of well-being, right? Managing what is often described as I think a very common experience of graduate student life, which is whether it's feeling overwhelmed, an experience of burnout, And, I think that the resources that Josephine pointed towards, I think, can be really key in this regard, right? So that there is the wellness office. But I'd be interested to hear if either anyone else wants to talk a little bit about, are these experiences that you've encountered coming to graduate school? And if so, what are the ways or some of the resources that maybe you've drawn on to help you navigate that feeling of either burnout, which is slightly different than feeling overwhelmed, but often the two do march hand in hand. Michael, yeah.
All right, so I mean, this is also related to that part about how the transition from undergrad to graduate school. But like, I think one of the hardest things that I mean, just generally, just broadly speaking, the kind of person that generally goes to graduate school, as has been noted by some of the wellness counselors, tends to be kind of neurotic, perfectionist, and anxious in general. And when you make the transition to undergrad to graduate school, something that might be difficult to really actually understand, like it becomes part of you, is that the work is never done, and it sometimes done is better than perfect, and it does need to be just good enough that it can be submitted and that it will do the job that you want it to. And also the other thing is that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And they say that a lot, but it's very important when you start out with doing research, because research is very difficult, especially when you want to try to do something that can be beneficial to a lot of people, or that can really go to the fundamentals of your field. But like you need to pace yourself, right? And part of what I kind of do to try to not get as much burnout is that I kind of allocate my evenings off, and during those times I might socialize with my friends or just spend time however I want. But it's really important that you have like this restricted amount of time that your work cannot interfere with, right? Because once you let it interfere with that time, then it gets worse and worse, where it keeps on growing and infecting it, and then you're working like 80-hour weeks or something, and you're like insane because you're so unpleasant to be around with. Even when you socialize with other people, they don't really want to be around you. And I mean, just having a portion of time and just being like, you try your best, you are doing something new that other people haven't really been done. It's no one really knows how long it's going to take, but what's important is that you paced yourself, you've done what you could during the time that you have, and you really enjoyed it. Because if you spend so much time, you're gonna start to hate it, is the reality.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to speak. I mean, I have my own experience in that area, but I don't know if anyone, I don't know, Balkis, did you want to speak to any of that as well, or?
It's same, just the resources available, and then also finding a way to do other things outside of academic. And I will say in my case, I've done that, and it worked out for me. I used to volunteer before COVID. I used to volunteer for this community organization in the migrant community, and I'm still keeping up with them online, and it's helping me. And I know in school too, my faculty, we have FERSA, which is PhD Student in Environmental Studies Association. We used to have these socials before COVID, and we try to maintain it online. We just come, just coffee break, talk to one another, discuss other things outside of our research, and it helps. And on a couple of times, I think I've popped into York International's coffee break, and it's also a good time of outside of the research, because with that I got to hear a lot about other international students, the experiences, where they are coming from, what they are studying, and why they are studying the kind of topics they've chosen, which has been great. It's taking some 30 minutes, an hour out for me outside of my research to just refreshen up.
I think
Yeah.
So go ahead, Josephine, please.
No, it's okay, that's it.
I was just going to say that common thread, and something that I could tack on to, is that you're talking to people who aren't in your research field, which I think is really important to talk about something else. Before the pandemic, I was a competitive athlete, and so 5-6 days of the week I was in a gym working out with other athletes, and they sure were not talking about machine learning or rock mechanics. And it was so good to have a refreshing kind of clean slate to go back to the research with the next day.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important point to recognize that, and this is so hard because of how wrapped up the identity of a graduate student or a researcher gets with the work, with who they are, with who what they do, and to recognize that it's important to sort of set those limits, and that those limits are important, that there's a whole human there alongside the person who's the researcher, and to seek out those opportunities. And I think there's a couple of resources here, whether this is through the Wellness Office, whether, as you mentioned, the York International, but sort of one of a number of organizations across campus that students can affiliate with at the graduate student level as well. There is, alongside this, there is YUGSA, which is the York University Graduate Student Association. There are graduate student associations in each of the graduate programs. So every program will have it. So there's a whole set of structures there, which are aligned with the program, but are not the academic part of the program necessarily, but are part of, and that can be important. Maybe you'll find people there who you'll be friends with and you'll talk about things that aren't related to work, but you'll certainly find people there who are in the same situation as you are, of being in graduate school and trying to make their way through and succeeding and being very engaged in their work, but also realizing that there are a whole range of pressures around them. And I do want to take this opportunity, though, to answer one of the questions that was put to the chat, which was, and I don't know, it's about advice for part-time graduate students. And I don't know if anybody wants to provide or can provide any feedback there around balancing being part-time and the academic context and part-time, having other responsibilities elsewhere.
I can speak to that a bit. I mean, I'm a full-time student, but I actually also consult for 2 other companies on the side. So balancing time management is, I live and die by my Google Calendar at this point. But I think staying in touch with the graduate student program while you're also doing other things, whether it be working or if whatever the reason is that you're doing part-time, can be challenging, especially in the pandemic. I won't say that it was easy, but as much as you get out what you put in. If you have the time to go to the coffee chats that were mentioned, or drop into the other organizations that exist across campus, or have those more informal conversations with faculty members or other graduate students in your department, is a really good way to kind of keep in tune with what's going on. I know some faculties have colloquiums where grad students are presenting their research, or kind of water cooler chats that have moved online. So as much as possible, getting involved with those types of things can really help you feel part of the community. And funnily enough, I think in this online world in the last 2 years, a lot of us probably have experienced what it might be like to be part-time, because it all feels like we work part-time from home and we're not really in the environment of our departments as much anymore.
Well, and I was gonna add to that. I think one of the things that I think moving forward may be more common across campus is that, and I know that we're thinking about this, and certainly in terms of some of the events we organized at the Faculty of Graduate Studies around professionalization, is we're gonna keep some number of those online, recognizing that there are a lot of students for whom, whether part-time, declared part-time, or part-time because they have other responsibilities elsewhere, for whom a trip up to campus to attend a particular kind of event can often be a time commitment that just isn't feasible, because it's either time at the office or childcare responsibilities or elder care responsibilities or whatever else is going on, right? And so I know we're going to be trying to make an effort to keep some portion of those events available, because we did find that we were able to just reach out to students who otherwise maybe couldn't figure that way clear in their Google Calendar to clear that 3 or 4 hours to make it to campus. So I know that this is something that a lot of people are thinking about and recognizing, not certainly to move everything online, realizing the importance of people staying in touch with each other in person, in real time, but recognizing that there is still a very real space for those of us that are maybe further afield from campus, or for whom that's difficult. I am noticing the time we're at, so we're coming into our final 15 minutes. There is 2 last questions, and I'm just going to review. Actually, I like a question actually that's in the chat that if I'm understanding it, that Eunice asked some time ago, but I want to come back to it, which is maybe again a bit of a big picture. question, and maybe we can finish with that, a question about thinking about your research. And if you came to your research with the desire to impact social change. I know from listening to each of you and what you've described your work as, I know that this may figure somewhere in how you think about the work you do. So I'd like to hear you, maybe we can finish on that note. But I'm going to ask sort of three sort of pretty standard questions here to end. So we'll end with that one. But first I want to say, like, what is something that you wish, what's one thing you wish you knew before you started grad school that now you think is, like, if you had to tell a graduate student, somebody comes to you, say, I'm thinking of applying, and you're like, this is the one thing I must tell you. What is the one sort of nugget of wisdom you would share with a prospective graduate student? It's a tough question, I know. Michael.
I've already said it, but I really want to stress, that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Like I mean, just personally, for speaking from burnout, it's very different from undergrad. During undergrad, you could sprint and then you get the assignment done and then, it's over. You're happy and everything, but research is different. Until the question is answered correctly and properly and thoroughly, it is not done. And you need to be able to cope with that. And that might take many tries to get to answer the question correctly. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
A good one. A marathon, not a sprint. Not everyone has to have as pithy a saying as Michael does.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
I was going to steal it, but I couldn't because you all heard him say it earlier. But well, I was going to talk more about the perfectionism aspect of it. I think it's really undervalued how if you're in grad school, you're in the top 1% of that field, which means that you probably don't need to complete everything to perfection, because even at 80% completion or 80% of perfection, you're still in the top 1% of your field. So the kind of, I guess, golden nugget, so to speak, there is take it easy on yourself, because you're doing good.
Another good one. I mean, I can see the t-shirts that we're going to be printing with the York logo on them. Yeah, Balakasu,
Yeah, I would like to talk more in line with PhD kind of journey. For me, what I've seen so far is a long term, it's a long journey, and it will demand a lot of commitment. A lot of life changes will happen. For some of us, maybe someone might marry along the line, give birth, have children along the line. It's still part of the process. It's not meant to end at a specific time. I know there are departments kind of regulations on when you're supposed to finish a PhD and all that, but there's always a way out. If something happens, there's a way out. The department might give you kind of, you can defer the program, come back again and pick up from where you started. So that's what I would like to, add. Yeah.
I mean, another great point that life happens, and that there's structure, not to again boil it down to a t-shirt slogan, but life happens, and that the university is responsive to that there are leaves that can be taken, that they can be structured in a way that you won't be kicked out of the program because you're taking care of a child or something else happens to you during the length of your program. So that's absolutely, I think, all great points. Thanks to each of you. On a more practical question, is there any advice that you would provide to students who are in the midst of preparing or recently prepared an application?
Yeah, I would say carefully select your references. Make sure that the people that you choose to write your letters or to be the phone call or whatever it is that form the reference takes, that they actually know your work, and that you've told them that there might be somebody calling them, asking them for a reference. I think that's really important. There's nothing that speaks louder than someone else advocating on your behalf.
That's a great one. Michael, yeah.
There's something to add on, but I think in some cases, and I might say that isn't supposed to be how it's done, but in some cases, I feel like the references is weighted the most. It could be weighted 90% in some cases. I mean, it depends because at least in psychology, once you get past the sort of the initial competition, then it's just up to the individual professor to decide whether they want to take you on or not. And in some cases, your reference might be worth 90% or even more, maybe even 100% of whether they're interested in you or not.
And I think that this is one of those places where you need to think about the application as moving in two directions, right? That the application is in some ways a chance to present everything that you've done to this point, but then it's also moving forward, right? Like it's projecting into where you are going. And I think that that's often a more complicated but equally important area, whether this is that contact with the faculty member on Faculty Now to say, I will work with the student, or that's just simply about you, even as simple as reading the website for the program you're applying to, so that you're describing the work you're doing in the context of that program, can make such a difference. Balakasu, yeah, I'm sorry, I interjected there, but please let me hand it over to you.
It's just okay. I was just thinking about something. When I was submitting my application, I think for one of the schools, I remember calling the graduate, the FGS, the Faculty of Graduate Studies, and asking a whole lot of questions about whether or not they've received my references, because by then I was, I think I was in Ghana or either in Italy. So just calling to ask if they've received it and all that. That actually shows how serious I am and how, I have all these timelines marked onto my calendar to make sure they receive it before the deadline. But one other thing I would want to add is about the CV, our experiences. I know especially after undergrad or after master's, some of us might have a lot of experiences, but how to, highlight the specific experiences on our CV, it's very important, because if you have a specific data management skills, data analytics skills or experience, it's very important to highlight it on your CV, because with that, the professor or the admission, the review committee will be able to know the kind of the package you are bringing, and whether or not you are a good match for what they are looking for. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, these are all such great points, and I think with that last one, what brings to mind is, it's always important to adequately and clearly document the things that you've done and the things you have on your record, because this is often something that I think comes up where students will preempt what they think the committee will want. And so they shape themselves into a very specific kind of candidate that they think is the ideal researcher candidate, not recognizing that the researcher is actually sort of might be based upon if this is involvement with community organizations, if this is a set of skills that have emerged that feed into your project, but maybe haven't taken shape in the form of, say, participation in an undergraduate conference or working in a research lab or whatever. And I think that this is all the ways in which, if you can find a way to clearly document that can make such a difference in terms of communicating who you are when the committee sees you and starts to look at your file. Yeah, and then I think the last real question is, we have like 4 or 5 minutes left, and I think that this is. I guess built a little bit off the question that Eunice asked, which is that, thinking about how your desire to impact or affect change is been built or integrated into how you think about graduate studies. And I'm a little bit freestyling off of Eunice's questions here, but I'm sort of thinking here in a little bit different, which is to say that in each of your contexts, you're talking about a project that has like real world applications, real world impact. This will be something that people, it's not a project whose relevance is confined to the page, to the library, to the hard drive. It is, well, I mean, I guess if you're an engineer and you're a computer engineer, it can be confined to the hard drive, but the bigger question is there, so how have you thought about the relationship between your desire to impact change for people, for the benefit of people more broadly, with the kind of work that you're doing? And how do you think about the relationship between those two things? It's a bit of a left ball question, not on the list.
I think what that makes me think of is something I said at the beginning is that I've pursued what I've been good at or what I've liked, then I become good at it, then I get paid for it. And the same thing kind of goes for my research is if you want to think of it in the context of sustainable development goals or, where you can make the most impact, I think everybody can make the most impact in an area that they're have a talent or something level of experience or knowledge that they can bring to that. And so graduate studies is just another vehicle of that. So if you're really passionate about psychology and that's what you pursue and that's how you can make change, that's what you should do instead of trying to fit yourself or shoehorn yourself into a certain type of change you think you can affect. For me personally, I've always enjoyed geology and working with natural materials, and the challenge of how to extract resources sustainably and safely, even autonomously in some cases, has always been something that was really interesting to me. And that blended with my interest in technology development was just a good fit for me. That's where I can bring my strengths, my communication skills, my organization, my spatial reasoning skills, partially things that I had a talent for, partially things I've developed over the course of my experience and my graduate studies. And that's where I think I can make the most positive change. So that's what I would challenge anyone who wants to pursue grad studies to think about is what are your strengths and how can you play those up the most.
Thanks. Michael, I see you're on mute. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think I'll say something that generally applies to social sciences, and so perhaps we could say it's like psychology, sociology, and the such. But I think for my kind of field, what's most important when you want to have a social impact is that, well, sometimes in social sciences the literature can seem kind of detached from the real world, it has very complicated terminology and jargon, and its relationship with the real world can be kind of difficult to see. And I think for social scientists in particular, what's most important is that you actually spend time with other people, and you kind of see the real world problems, and you also need to keep in mind the academic literature at the back of your head, and you kind of compare, all right, well, the literature says this. In the real world, what are the problems, and how does the literature fail to meet it, or how does it meet it but people aren't aware of the literature? These kinds of things I think is really important for social sciences. And sometimes I feel like we can kind of get stuck in a hole and we're really digging on the problem, and no worries with that, but I think it's really important to actually go out in the real world and see how the literature compares to real world.
Thank you for that. And finally, I'll pass it over to you, Balkis, if you have something you want to add.
Yes, I just like that Michael mentioned that, because usually the academic environment and the real world are two different environments. But for me, I think what I want to add is that in my context, as someone from Africa, there are a whole bunch of problems in Africa. So for me, it's about identifying the topic that matters at a specific moment. So what's going on right now? I mentioned before I was into agricultural sector risk assessment, and from that time, food security issues has been on the top globally in Africa. So that's how I identify an area that I think I could make a very good, positive impact, and could also help me academically and intellectually to grow. So that's my number one. And then that has been, my kind of advice and my motivation to move forward. So it's about the work that matters. Food security issues matters. Climate change issues matters. There are a whole lot of challenges, but when we take food security and climate change, they're on top, of the list. And particularly with regards to smallholder farmers in Ghana, it's one of the biggest. Climate and food insecurities are the two biggest issues they face. So why not researching into these areas? By researching into these areas, working with them, understanding how they perceive issues and how they manage the risk, directly contributing to how to make their lives better. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to add. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all three of you. I mean, I think all three of you sort of highlighted that that graduate school is one part of a bigger picture of who we are. And I think also graduate school isn't an end in itself, right? That it is one of the ways that we get into the conversations, into the context that we want to work, whether that's professionally, but also more broadly, thinking about the ways that we can think about the various challenges that are facing local communities, but also globally that are facing, life on this planet. So we are at the end of today's conversation, and I wanted to thank all three of you for joining me today, for sharing your thoughts, and I think for offering for really a number of really inspiring and very pragmatic and useful points. So in this regard, I just want to thank all three of you. It's really been something that I've really enjoyed, and I think learned a few things. And I hope that you and everyone who's joining us has a great evening. And we look forward to seeing you at York, maybe in the fall.